What if I told you that something as simple as going without food could unlock the deepest power of your soul? Most of us grow up hearing that fasting is just a matter of physical health, a way to cleanse the body or lose a few pounds. But what if fasting was never meant to be only about the body? What if its true purpose was to awaken the spirit, open hidden doors of perception, and connect you directly with the divine? Has this ever happened to you? That hunger or silence made you feel closer to something greater than yourself? If so, what you're about to discover might surprise you even more. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Edgar Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, shook audiences when he declared that fasting was not just about diet or health, but about unlocking the very essence of the soul. In his readings, he explained that skipping meals was more than a discipline of the body. It was a sacred practice that purified the temple of flesh so that spiritual forces could flow without resistance. Imagine that, something so ordinary as abstaining from food becoming a living key to align yourself with the eternal laws of God. For Cayce, fasting was not denial, but redirection. Energy that would normally be consumed in digestion was lifted toward higher levels of consciousness, where the voice of God could be heard more clearly. He described it as a sacred reset, a moment when the body grows lighter, the mind clearer, and the soul suddenly tuned like an instrument to the divine frequency. And isn't that what so many of us long for? A way to silence the noise, to remove the static, and to hear the whispers of eternity? Stay with me until the end, because you'll see how Cayce's insights redefined fasting as a spiritual gateway far beyond what most people imagine. In one of his most striking sessions, he reminded seekers that modern life, with its excesses and distractions, dulls our spiritual senses. The abundance of food, the constant indulgence, and the endless cycle of craving and consuming weigh down the body and cloud the soul. But when fasting is practiced with intention and humility, something changes. The heaviness lifts, and a person feels not only lighter in body, but closer to Jesus Christ himself, the perfect model of discipline, surrender, and divine alignment. Think about it. Before his greatest decisions, before facing trials, even before revelations, Christ withdrew to fast and pray. Cayce insisted that by echoing this ancient rhythm, we too could tap into the same spiritual current that strengthened the Son of God. And isn't that extraordinary? That the very act of withholding food when paired with prayer can mirror the path of Christ and place us in direct resonance with divine strength. What Cayce revealed challenged the common view of fasting as a harsh tradition or a test of endurance. Instead, he spoke of it as a way to cleanse not just the body, but the heart and the mind, a discipline that sharpened the will, released destructive patterns, and opened channels of guidance from beyond. In his words, fasting allowed the soul to remember what it had forgotten, its eternal connection to God. So the next time you feel the pangs of hunger, imagine them not as punishment, but as signals, gentle reminders that the soul is tuning itself to a higher frequency. Imagine fasting not as emptiness, but as space being cleared for something greater to enter. And perhaps, like many who listen to Cayce, you'll begin to see this ancient practice in an entirely new light. Stay with me, because we've only just opened the door. What comes next may change the way you think about fasting forever. If these insights speak to you and you want to keep uncovering more hidden truths like this, make sure to subscribe. That way, you'll always have a place to return for guidance, clarity, and inspiration. When Edgar Cayce spoke about fasting as a sacred reset, he wasn't using lofty symbolism meant to impress. He was pointing to something deeply practical and at the same time profoundly spiritual. He described the body as a temple designed to reflect divine order, but like any temple, it can become cluttered with excess, weighed down by distractions, and disconnected from its true purpose. The sacred reset of fasting was his way of reminding people that the body is not only flesh and bone, it is a vessel for divine energy, and when we lighten it, when we cleanse it, we allow that energy to flow with greater clarity. Imagine what that means in your own life. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to think clearly when you feel heavy, tired, or overstimulated? Cayce believed those moments weren't just about biology. They revealed a deeper truth, that the spirit struggles to shine when the body is burdened. For him, fasting was never about punishment or deprivation. He saw it as redirection, a conscious choice to take the energy that would normally be consumed by digestion and elevate it towards something higher. Instead of being trapped in cycles of consumption, the soul could suddenly tune into frequencies beyond the noise, where God's voice could be heard with greater purity. This idea was revolutionary because it reframed fasting from a rigid tradition into a living practice that affected every layer of being, body, mind, and spirit. It was about transformation, about shifting one's entire mindset from survival and indulgence toward awareness and surrender. And in that shift, hidden truths began to surface. Cayce warned that modern life was drowning people in excess, not only through food but also through constant distraction. He saw clearly that when we live surrounded by noise, abundance, and overstimulation, our spiritual sensitivity becomes dulled. We mistake fullness for strength, when in reality it often numbs our perception. Fasting then became a way to strip back the unnecessary, to silence the static, to rediscover the fine-tuned capacity of the soul. He spoke of it as a behind-the-scenes process that prepared a person for revelations they could not access while weighed down by excess. Think about the impact of this perspective. The idea that by choosing emptiness for a short time, we actually create space for fullness of another kind. That the absence of food is not lack, but invitation, an opening for divine impressions to enter where clutter once lived. It is a journey inward, one that requires both courage and humility, because it confronts us not only with physical hunger, but also with the restlessness we often avoid. Fasting reveals what lies hidden beneath the surface, the fears, the attachments, the unresolved emotions, and Cayce insisted this was part of its power. By facing these truths, by allowing them to rise, we allow God's light to dissolve them, leaving the soul lighter and clearer. He often connected this with the example of Jesus Christ, reminding people that before his greatest decisions and revelations, Christ withdrew to fast and pray. For Cayce, this was no coincidence. It was a model of preparation, a demonstration of discipline and surrender that anyone could follow. He believed that by imitating this rhythm, even in small ways, we could align ourselves with the same eternal current of strength that carried Christ through his mission. In this sense, fasting was not merely a discipline of the body, but a profound act of alignment, aligning choices, aligning mindset, aligning the vessel of flesh with the divine will. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the way Cayce described fasting opened doors not just to physical renewal, but to spiritual perception itself. He revealed that when the body grows lighter, the mind sharper, the soul becomes attuned to dimensions of truth usually hidden from daily awareness. It is in that state, he said, that one begins to experience revelations, insights, and a sense of closeness to the eternal that cannot be reached by comfort alone. If this resonates with you, I'd love to see it in the comments. Write, "This makes sense to me," not just as words, but as a way of affirming that you, too, recognize the value of clearing space for something greater. Because when we share these reflections, we realize we are not walking this journey alone. When Edgar Cayce connected fasting to the life of Christ, he was not offering a poetic comparison. He was pointing to a lived truth, a rhythm that Jesus himself followed as preparation for moments of great decision and revelation. Before facing temptation in the wilderness, before stepping into the weight of his mission, Christ chose to fast. That choice was not weakness or punishment. It was alignment, a deliberate surrender of the body's demands so the spirit could attune itself more fully to the Father. For Cayce, imitating that example meant walking the same path of discipline and humility, a path where strength does not come from what you consume, but from what you release. It was a way of entering into the same current of divine power that sustained Jesus when everything around him demanded compromise. Cayce often emphasized that fasting, when done with humility and prayer, created openings in places most people didn't even realize existed. He described it as unlocking channels in the subconscious, those hidden layers where the soul carries impressions, memories, and patterns far deeper than the conscious mind can perceive. In that quiet space, when the noise of the body is hushed, guidance can flow like a whisper, subtle but unmistakable. Many people reported vivid dreams, sudden insights, or the sense of being nudged in a direction they had resisted. And Cayce explained this was no accident. Fasting prepared the ground so that divine impressions could take root without interference, allowing seekers to glimpse truths they would otherwise overlook. One of the most moving stories from his readings involved a man weighed down by depression and chronic illness. He was burdened not only by toxins in his body, but also by guilt and fear that had accumulated over years. His life felt directionless, his spirit drained. Cayce, in trance, prescribed not only a disciplined fast but also daily prayer, a rhythm of both body and soul. The man followed the instructions, and what happened astonished those around him. It was not only his health that began to return, but his sense of purpose. He spoke with renewed clarity, stood taller, and carried himself with a strength that seemed to come from within. Cayce explained that fasting did more than cleanse the physical body. It burned away the residue of destructive patterns, loosening chains that had bound the soul across lifetimes. This was the hidden truth many found hardest to accept, that something as ordinary as abstaining from food could have such profound impact on both physical and spiritual levels. Yet Cayce made it clear that fasting was not about starvation or proving endurance. It was liberation, a release of everything that weighs the spirit down so that divine energy could flow unobstructed. He showed that transformation does not always require dramatic external events. Sometimes it begins in the quiet, behind the scenes, where the deepest battles are fought and won. The shift was less about food and more about mindset, the decision to surrender, to create space for God, and to allow that space to be filled with new life. For those listening during the dark years of economic despair, these teachings carried a weight that went beyond theory. People who had been forced into hunger by circumstance struggled to understand how fasting could be holy when their daily reality was already deprivation. Cayce drew a crucial distinction. True fasting, he explained, is chosen, not imposed. Its power lies in the intention behind it. Hunger born of poverty creates suffering, but hunger offered willingly to God transforms suffering into strength. That difference of mindset changed everything. It reframed the act from lack to devotion, from despair to discipline, showing that the heart of fasting was not emptiness, but alignment with divine law. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the more we explore Cayce's vision, the more we see that fasting was not simply about cleansing or sacrifice. It was about awakening a forgotten capacity within the human soul, a capacity to hear, to perceive, to remember its eternal connection. It was the beginning of a journey where physical choices opened spiritual doors, where small acts of surrender carried consequences far beyond what the eye could see. If you feel that these ideas stir something in you, leave it in the comments. Write, "I'm also on this path," because sharing those words not only affirms your own journey but also reminds others who watch that they are not walking alone. Cayce often spoke with a clarity that startled people because he linked fasting not only to physical health but to the very fabric of the soul's journey. When he explained that fasting could burn away karmic residues, he was pointing to a hidden truth that most had never considered. According to him, the choices, fears, and attachments we accumulate do not disappear when life ends. They echo across lifetimes, shaping patterns that follow us silently. Fasting, when combined with prayer and humility, acted like a fire that consumed not only physical impurities, but also those invisible chains. Imagine the impact of this perspective. The idea that something as simple as abstaining from food could reach into the unseen and free a soul from burdens it may have carried for generations. It was more than purification. It was liberation, a transformation of destiny itself. The timing of these revelations made them even more striking. The Great Depression was a season when hunger was everywhere, but it was a hunger no one had chosen. Families lined up for bread, parents skipped meals so their children could eat, and survival was the only focus. To those living in such despair, fasting hardly seemed like a spiritual gift. Yet Cayce reframed it entirely. He taught that while forced deprivation created suffering, a deliberate and conscious fast transformed that same experience into a ladder toward God. He differentiated between the cruelty of lack and the discipline of surrender. It was not the emptiness of the stomach that carried power, but the intention of the heart. This shift in mindset was revolutionary, because it revealed that even in times of crisis, the soul could choose to transform what seemed like despair into a deeper alignment with divine order. He made it clear that intention was everything. Fasting without purpose was only hunger, but fasting with prayer, meditation, and focus became sacred. This was not about how long someone could endure without food, nor was it a test of endurance or a punishment to prove worth. It was a decision, a conscious act of aligning the human vessel with God's light. In this way, fasting mirrored the larger journey of life itself, a series of decisions where what matters most is not the external appearance, but the inner direction of the will. The discipline was not about resisting food. It was about learning to redirect desire, to master impulses, and to remind the soul that its deepest nourishment does not come from bread alone. Behind the scenes of these teachings was always the same message: transformation is born from choice. Cayce described fasting as a tool to reclaim freedom, to loosen the hold of habits and patterns that keep people enslaved. Just as chains of the body restrict movement, chains of the spirit restrict perception. They bind the mind with fear, guilt, and attachment until clarity becomes impossible. But in fasting, the seeker encountered those chains, saw them for what they were, and learned to release them. It was a journey inward, one that illuminated hidden corners of the self and revealed the quiet power of surrender. And in that surrender, the soul rose lighter, clearer, more attuned to God. What made Cayce's message so compelling was the way he wove together the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual. He showed how fasting purified the body, calmed the mind, and awakened the spirit, all at once. He did not present it as superstition, but as a practice that touched every layer of existence. For him, the fast was like striking a match in a darkened room. Suddenly, what was hidden is revealed, what was heavy becomes lighter, and what felt impossible becomes possible. This was why intention mattered more than deprivation. Without intention, hunger was just emptiness. With intention, hunger became a signal, a sacred reminder that each moment of discomfort could be redirected toward something eternal. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce did not stop at the individual. He spoke of fasting as a force that shaped communities, families, and even generations, showing that its impact extended far beyond the one who practiced it. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "Freedom begins within." By sharing these words, you affirm not only your own understanding, but also encourage others to see fasting not as lack, but as a pathway toward liberation. Cayce never allowed fasting to be reduced to a mere physical exercise. He was very clear: without prayer, without an inner posture of humility, fasting was nothing more than starvation. The body might grow weaker, but the soul would gain nothing from it. What gave meaning to the act was not the absence of food, but the presence of devotion. It was prayer that redirected hunger into a sacred language, turning each pang into a reminder of dependence on God. This subtle shift transformed fasting from emptiness into communion, from deprivation into preparation. It was a mindset, a conscious decision to align not just the stomach, but the entire being, with something greater. To help people grasp this, Cayce often compared fasting to spring cleaning. Just as a house accumulates dust and clutter over time, the body and mind gather toxins, distractions, and unresolved emotions. A home can look fine on the surface but still feel heavy until everything unnecessary is cleared away. Fasting worked in the same way, sweeping out the debris that dulled perception and weighed down the spirit. Once cleared, the vessel was ready to be used as it was intended, a temple for divine energy to move through freely. This image made fasting practical and relatable because everyone understood the relief of stepping into a freshly cleaned space. It wasn't about what had been removed, but about the openness and lightness that followed. Discipline was the key that unlocked this transformation. Withholding food was not meant to punish the body, but to train the will. Cayce explained that when someone chose to fast, they were practicing mastery over impulses that normally controlled them. In that process, the strength developed extended far beyond appetite. It became the same strength that could overcome fear, anger, resentment, and even destructive habits like addiction. Every time hunger arose and was redirected toward prayer, a new pattern was carved into the soul, a reminder that the spirit had authority over the body, not the other way around. Behind the scenes of this teaching was a hidden truth. Fasting was never just about food. It was about training the inner self to endure discomfort, to face temptation, and to recognize that true nourishment comes from beyond the material. Cayce pointed to the example of Christ in the wilderness, fasting before confronting temptation. This was not symbolic. It was evidence that discipline of the body prepared the spirit for battles far greater than hunger. Just as an athlete trains muscles before the competition, the seeker trained willpower before the trials of life. That preparation, Cayce said, could change the course of decisions, shaping a destiny aligned with divine will rather than fleeting desire. What fascinated people most was how practical his words felt, even when touching on the most mystical ideas. He was not describing a distant ritual for saints, but a living practice anyone could embrace. The act of fasting became a rehearsal for transformation, a chance to experience in the body what the soul would need in larger struggles. This shift in mindset turned what many saw as a burdensome tradition into an empowering journey. Each fast, no matter how simple, was a reminder that the human spirit could rise above cravings, distractions, and fears, reclaiming its place as master of its own path. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce showed that fasting was not only a personal discipline, but also a doorway into mysteries of the subconscious, where guidance, healing, and revelations awaited those willing to surrender. If this resonates with you, leave in the comments, "Discipline awakens strength." Writing it is not just agreeing with the idea, but affirming that you recognize how inner discipline can shape transformation far beyond the surface. Cayce often reminded his listeners that fasting was never about resisting food alone. It was about preparing the soul for battles that could not be seen. Just as Christ faced the wilderness before stepping into his ministry, every seeker would eventually be confronted with their own deserts, those inner landscapes where temptation, fear, and doubt rise up like shadows. Fasting became a kind of rehearsal for those moments, a conscious act of discipline that trained the will to stay aligned with the eternal rather than be swept away by passing desires. In the hunger, a person learned to meet weakness head-on, not to run from it, but to transform it into strength. That is why he called fasting training. It was spiritual conditioning, shaping a mindset that could face not only the cravings of the body, but the greater temptations of the soul. Skeptics dismissed these ideas as nothing more than psychological tricks, claiming that fasting simply altered brain chemistry. But Cayce did not draw lines between mind and spirit the way modern thought often does. For him, the two were inseparably woven. He explained that when the body quiets, the subconscious awakens, and in that state, divine law can impress itself more deeply. What the skeptics saw as mental shifts, Cayce saw as sacred realignment. The subconscious, usually clouded by noise, became like still water in which higher truths could reflect. This was not illusion, it was revelation. In those moments, seekers discovered that the hidden truth was not that fasting weakens a person, but that it uncovers their true resilience. It realigned the fragmented parts of being into a single harmonious flow. One of the most compelling stories he shared involved a woman who had spent years trapped in destructive habits that drained her body and darkened her spirit. By the time she sought Cayce's guidance, her health was failing, and her outlook was heavy with despair. In trance, he prescribed a short fast, but he did not leave it at that. He instructed her to spend the days reading aloud from the Gospel of John, to pray at sunrise, and to use the time of hunger as an opportunity for forgiveness, both of others and of herself. She followed this counsel, and the transformation was undeniable. Those who knew her described not only a change in her health, but something deeper. Her very presence shifted. Her voice carried peace. Her eyes shone with clarity, and she radiated an energy that had been absent for years. Cayce explained that this was the true power of fasting, when it was united with prayer and scripture. The body was renewed, yes, but more importantly, the spirit was freed. The fast had become more than abstinence. It was a journey of inner cleansing, a behind-the-scenes process that dissolved years of resentment and self-condemnation. In letting go of food, she had also let go of bitterness, and what remained was a vessel ready to be filled with divine love. For those who witnessed her, it was proof that fasting was not superstition, but transformation. It was not a ritual for saints, locked away in monasteries, but a living practice that touched the daily struggles of ordinary people. This story was just one among many that showed how Cayce's vision of fasting reached far beyond the surface. He was not teaching people how to escape life, but how to face it differently, with a renewed sense of strength and clarity. Every fast became a mirror, reflecting both the battles within and the possibility of victory when those battles were surrendered to God. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Cayce revealed that fasting did not only heal individuals, it challenged the very boundaries of what science and society believed possible, opening the door to insights that continue to ripple through our understanding of body, mind, and spirit. If this touched something inside you, write in the comments, "Inner battles can be won." By putting these words down, you're not only affirming the message, but also reminding yourself that strength grows in the quiet choices we make when no one else is watching. Cayce explained that the woman's transformation was not simply the result of willpower or physical endurance. It came from something far deeper, the moment she opened herself to divine love. He described fasting as a doorway that allowed God's healing presence to enter where fear and heaviness had once lived. The fast had cleansed her body, yes, but it was love that renewed her spirit. That is why her eyes shone brighter, why her words carried peace, and why her very energy seemed different. For Cayce, fasting was never just a physical act. It was an invitation, a clearing of space so that love could flow in unhindered. And that love was not abstract or distant. It was alive, personal, and tangible, ready to transform anyone who chose surrender over resistance. This was where Cayce often drew a sharp contrast between science and spirit. In his time, medical experts were quick to dismiss fasting as either dangerous or meaningless, seeing no value beyond calorie restriction or weight loss. But Cayce argued that their view was incomplete, because it looked only at the body while ignoring the hidden dimensions of mind and spirit. He warned that science was blind to the deeper currents shaping human health, currents that could not be measured with instruments but could be felt in the soul. For him, fasting was not against science but beyond it, a practice that worked on levels researchers had not yet begun to explore. He insisted that one day the scientific world would catch up, that evidence would surface proving what the spirit already knew. Decades later, his words began to echo with surprising accuracy. Research revealed that fasting could trigger processes of detoxification, boost mental clarity, reset natural rhythms, and even enhance healing responses in the body. What modern studies called autophagy, Cayce had described in his own language as the body's way of cleansing itself when digestion rested. Scientists spoke of hormonal balance, cellular repair, and improved brain function, while Cayce had framed it as renewal, clarity, and the lifting of spiritual fog. Different words, same truth. He had seen it long before the evidence appeared, because he was not only observing the physical, he was tapping into the hidden truth behind it all. Yet even as these discoveries emerged, Cayce reminded his listeners that fasting's greatest impact could not be measured in a lab. Science could confirm detoxification, but it could not quantify the peace that flooded the soul when prayer accompanied hunger. Research could show sharper focus, but it could not explain the revelations that came in dreams or the sudden courage that rose in the face of fear. Behind the scenes of every physical process was a spiritual law at work, and fasting was one of the few practices that touched all dimensions of being at once. It was both practical and mystical, both measurable and mysterious. This blending of science and spirit fascinated people because it suggested that the gap between them was not as wide as many believed. Cayce showed that the body and soul were not separate, but partners in a single journey of transformation. What modern medicine would one day prove with data, the soul already knew by experience. The act of fasting, he said, was like striking a chord that resonated across every level of existence, creating harmony where there had been dissonance. It reminded seekers that the hidden truth of life is that healing does not come from one direction alone. It comes from the integration of body, mind, and spirit. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce revealed that fasting did not just purify, it dissolved barriers that stretched across lifetimes, touching the eternal patterns of the soul itself. If this perspective speaks to you, write in the comments, "Science and spirit are one." By putting these words down, you affirm that you see beyond appearances and recognize the deeper unity guiding the journey of healing and transformation. Cayce often described fasting as one of the rare practices capable of touching the body, mind, and soul all at once. To him, it wasn't just a physical adjustment or a spiritual exercise. It was an act that rippled across every layer of existence. When the body rested from its constant cycle of digestion, the mind cleared, and the soul stepped forward with new strength. He explained that this process didn't simply restore energy in the present moment. It also dissolved barriers built over time, walls of fear, habits, or even karmic residues carried from past incarnations. The hidden truth, he said, was that much of the heaviness people feel isn't tied only to this life. It comes from layers of decisions and attachments woven across lifetimes. Fasting, when joined with prayer and humility, loosened those invisible chains and allowed the soul to breathe again. That release brought something more than temporary relief. It reminded the soul of its true origin in God. In the quiet of fasting, when the body became light and the chatter of the mind softened, an ancient memory surfaced, a memory of the eternal self. Cayce described it as a window opening, where the divine light poured in, not from outside, but from the very core of the soul. This moment of recognition was not theoretical. Many who practiced fasting with sincerity reported feeling a presence of peace so profound that it was unmistakable. It was as though the soul had been waiting for the body to step aside so it could whisper, "You are not lost. You are not broken. You belong to God." That realization carried a weight far greater than physical healing. It gave people a sense of direction, a renewal of purpose, and a confidence that life's trials were never endured alone. The impact of this teaching became even more visible during times of collective suffering. In the years of war, when chaos was everywhere, people turned to Cayce not just for medical advice but for hope. Families feared for loved ones far away. Uncertainty hung heavy over every decision, and anxiety gnawed at even the strongest hearts. Cayce reminded them that fasting, combined with prayer, was more than an individual discipline. It was a way to anchor peace within, while the world trembled outside. He explained that hunger, when offered to God, became a silent prayer, a continuous lifting of the heart that steadied the spirit even as bombs fell or news from the front carried sorrow. This practice gave ordinary people a way to carry extraordinary strength. Mothers who fasted while praying for their sons overseas spoke of feeling an overwhelming sense of calm, as if divine assurance wrapped around them. Some even described vivid dreams where their loved ones appeared surrounded by light, giving them courage to keep going. Cayce explained that these experiences were not fantasies. They were the natural result of fasting's power to heighten spiritual sensitivity, making the unseen more perceptible. Through this lens, fasting was not about retreating from reality, but about gaining the clarity to face it with courage. What made this perspective so transformative was the way it shifted the meaning of suffering. In war, hunger often arrived as an uninvited guest, a painful reminder of lack. But Cayce taught that chosen fasting, even brief and intentional, reframed hunger from despair into devotion. It became a statement of faith, a decision to stand in alignment with God even when the world seemed broken. That shift of mindset changed the experience entirely. Instead of being crushed by what they could not control, seekers discovered an inner sanctuary of peace that no external chaos could steal. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Cayce revealed that fasting, when embraced with humility, did more than soothe fear in hard times. It redefined endurance itself, showing that true strength was never about how much a body could withstand, but about how deeply the soul could connect with the eternal. If this strikes a chord with you, write in the comments, "Peace begins within." These words are more than a phrase. They are a reminder that even in the most turbulent moments, the journey toward calm always starts inside. Cayce explained that fasting reached an even greater dimension when it was not done only for oneself, but offered on behalf of others. He described how the very intention behind the act could multiply its power, transforming it into a force of communal healing. When someone fasted while praying for their family, their neighbors, or even strangers in need, the practice expanded beyond personal renewal. It became a channel through which divine strength could flow outward, touching lives far beyond the one who sacrificed. In those moments, hunger was no longer just a private reminder of dependence on God. It became intercession, a silent cry of the soul that carried weight in the unseen. This was fasting as service, a way to stand in the gap for others, creating ripples of peace, courage, and hope that extended far beyond what could be measured. But Cayce was careful to warn that not all fasting carried this sacred weight. He saw how easily people could approach it as a mechanical exercise, reducing it to a checklist of hours and days without touching the heart. When practiced with pride or comparison, fasting could actually feed the ego instead of the soul, making someone feel superior rather than surrendered. Cayce insisted that the purpose of fasting was never to display discipline as an achievement, but to practice humility. The hidden danger, he said, was turning the act into a performance that sought recognition. The real transformation came when fasting was done in secret, quietly, with a spirit turned toward God rather than toward human approval. Pride tightened chains. Humility broke them. That is why he always emphasized structure, not as rigidity, but as guidance. A fast framed with prayer and gratitude became a living conversation with the divine. Each hunger pang, instead of being resisted with bitterness, was reframed as a reminder to lift thoughts higher. In that way, hunger was not an enemy, but an ally, a gentle call back to Christ, a signal to remember what truly sustains the soul. Gratitude completed this cycle. Cayce encouraged seekers to end their fasts with thanks, to see each bite of food, afterward not as indulgence, but as sacred provision. This posture sealed the act, ensuring it was more than abstinence, it was communion. What made this approach so impactful was the way it changed everyday perception. Instead of being overwhelmed by cravings, people learned to see them as invitations. Instead of resenting the discomfort, they began to embrace it as a teacher, and in that reframing, fasting no longer felt like deprivation. It became a journey, one in which the seeker continually realigned body, mind, and spirit toward God. The hidden truth was that fasting, when practiced with humility and prayer, transformed even the smallest moments of discomfort into revelations. It turned weakness into opportunity, hunger into prayer, and silence into guidance. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce revealed that fasting was not only safe when practiced with intention, but could become a time of repair and renewal for the body itself, showing once more how the physical and spiritual were never truly separate. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "Humility gives power." These words serve as a reminder that the strength of fasting is never in the act alone, but in the spirit with which it is lived. In Cayce's time, many doctors warned that fasting could weaken the body, leaving people vulnerable and frail. Their concern reflected the medical mindset of the era, where anything that restricted nourishment seemed reckless. Yet, Cayce challenged this view, not dismissing the wisdom of medicine, but expanding it. He explained that short, intentional fasts, when guided by prayer and humility, were not only safe, but deeply restorative. He saw fasting not as deprivation, but as rhythm, a pause that allowed the body to reset and the spirit to speak. Instead of harming health, it often brought renewal, but only when approached with the right mindset. For Cayce, the danger was never in the fast itself, but in the way it was carried out. Without spiritual grounding, fasting risked becoming emptiness. With it, the act became sacred transformation. He often spoke of the body as an intelligent design, capable of using fasting as a time of repair. When digestion rested, energy was redirected toward healing processes that were usually suppressed by constant intake. Cells renewed themselves, tissues repaired, and natural rhythms reset. Modern science would later give names to these processes, but Cayce already understood them intuitively, describing them as the body's way of cleansing itself when given the chance. Yet he made a crucial distinction. Fasting without prayer remained limited to the physical. It might cleanse tissues, but it would not touch the deeper wounds of the soul. Only when prayer accompanied the hunger did the act rise from biology to sacrament, allowing divine impressions to enter and transform the seeker from within. To illustrate this, he used an image that captured people's imagination. He compared fasting to sweeping a temple. Just as dust and clutter accumulate over time, blocking light and beauty, so too does the human vessel gather distractions, toxins, and emotional weight. Fasting became the broom that cleared away what no longer served. And once the temple was clean, the presence of God could dwell freely, filling the space with peace and clarity. It was not the absence of food that created this holiness, but the presence of intention. Hunger itself became a symbol, each pang a reminder to open the doors wider, to invite light into the hidden corners of body, mind, and spirit. This way of seeing fasting shifted the entire narrative. Instead of being framed as a dangerous denial, it became preparation. Instead of a weakening, it became strengthening. The hidden truth Cayce revealed was that fasting was never simply about abstaining, but about creating space. Space for repair, space for reflection, space for revelation. And just as a temple shines brightest when its windows are cleared, the human vessel radiates more fully when its inner sanctuary is renewed. The impact was not only physical health, but also spiritual clarity, a sense that life itself could be seen with cleaner eyes once the clutter had been removed. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce revealed that fasting was not just cleansing, but tuning, a way of restoring harmony, like a musician adjusting strings to bring back the lost music of the soul. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "My soul is a temple." Putting those words down is a way of affirming that you see your body, mind, and spirit as a sacred space, ready to be renewed and filled with light. Cayce often turned to simple, vivid metaphors to help people grasp truths that were otherwise difficult to explain. One of the most striking was his comparison of fasting to tuning an instrument. Over time, the strings of a harp or violin lose their pitch, growing dull or dissonant. And no matter how skilled the musician may be, the music will not carry its intended beauty until the instrument is tuned again. In the same way, he explained, the human soul falls out of harmony with divine order. Daily distractions, unresolved emotions, unhealthy habits, and spiritual neglect tighten or loosen the strings of the inner life. Fasting, when approached with humility and prayer, became the act of tuning, restoring resonance with the eternal rhythm of God. The hidden truth was that even a short fast could bring alignment, allowing the soul to once again vibrate in harmony with higher laws. This image struck his audiences because it made something invisible suddenly tangible. The soul had its own music, and fasting was how one ensured it played in tune with the divine. From that perspective, fasting became more than just preparation for life. It was also preparation for death. Cayce described it as rehearsal for the final letting go, a practice that trained seekers to loosen their grip on what is temporary and embrace what is eternal. When the body is fed constantly, it reinforces attachment to the material. But when it is allowed to pause, the soul learns that it is not bound by the physical alone. Fasting reminded people that they are more than appetite, more than the needs of flesh. It revealed that true identity rests in spirit, and that spirit continues beyond the veil of death. Cayce said those who practiced fasting sincerely were better prepared to face their transition with peace and clarity, because they had already experienced, even if briefly, the release of the physical in favor of the eternal. The impact of this teaching was profound. It reframed mortality not as an end, but as a continuation of the soul's journey, and fasting as a way of preparing the inner traveler for that passage. But Cayce did not keep fasting in the realm of personal practice alone. He believed its power multiplied when it was shared in community, when a group of people chose to fast together. With a united intention and prayer, the spiritual energy generated was far greater than the sum of its parts. He often compared it to many voices joining in harmony. One person might produce a single note, but together they created a chorus that carried much further. During times of hardship, particularly in the years of economic struggle and war, groups in Virginia Beach and other places gathered not only to study scripture, but also to fast collectively, lifting their communities in prayer. The testimonies that followed spoke of courage renewed, unexpected opportunities opening, and a deep sense of being carried by something greater than themselves. This was fasting as a shared journey, a behind-the-scenes force that bound people together and infused their collective spirit with hope. What made this communal aspect so powerful was that it stripped away the idea of fasting as a solitary test of willpower. Instead, it became a tool for connection, Leiden, with God, with others, and with the deeper truth that no one walks the journey alone. In this way, fasting was not isolation, but communion. It was a decision to stand together in faith, to create a shared vibration of intention that could lift entire communities. Cayce saw in these moments a reflection of the early Christians, who also combined fasting and prayer when seeking guidance or facing persecution. For him, this was not coincidence. It was proof that fasting was a timeless practice, woven into the very fabric of spiritual resilience. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Cayce revealed that the real strength of fasting did not lie in extremes or self-denial, but in balance, a lesson that transformed the way people understood not only the act itself, but their relationship with the body as a sacred gift. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "My soul seeks harmony." By doing so, you affirm that your own journey is also about tuning the strings of life, finding resonance, and rediscovering the music of the spirit. Cayce insisted that the strength of fasting was never found in extremes. He warned that to push the body beyond its limits was not a sign of holiness, but of imbalance, because the body itself was a sacred gift entrusted to us. Balance and moderation, he explained, were the keys that allowed fasting to remain a channel of grace, rather than a source of harm. The body was not an enemy to be punished, but a temple to be cared for, and that meant listening to its rhythms, honoring its needs, and approaching fasting not as self-destruction, but as harmony. This perspective challenged the mindset of those who believed that the longer the fast, the greater the blessing. For Cayce, the hidden truth was that even the simplest act, such as missing one meal offered in prayer, could carry profound impact when done with sincerity. What mattered most was not the length or intensity, but the spirit in which it was lived. That is why his advice always sounded practical, almost disarmingly simple. He told seekers that fasting should never be about endurance contests or displays of willpower. Instead, it should be a gentle rhythm woven into life with intention. Rest was important because the body used the pause to heal itself. Reading scripture gave the mind nourishment that replaced what the stomach lacked. Meditation opened the heart to subtle impressions and revelations that the noise of daily life often drowned out. These practices transformed fasting from a mere absence of food into a full, rich experience where every part of the self was engaged. Behind the scenes, it was not just about skipping meals. It was about creating a sacred environment where transformation could take place naturally. Healing, Cayce said, always came when body and soul realigned. To him, disease was never purely physical. It was the reflection of deeper imbalances in thought, attitude, and spirit. Fasting offered a way to reset both layers at once. When the body rested and the mind turned inward in prayer, doors opened for the soul to release patterns of fear, resentment, or guilt that had been festering silently. This was why some people reported not only relief from physical pain, but also sudden clarity about decisions they had avoided, or emotional wounds they had carried for years. Fasting did more than cleanse the body. It illuminated the hidden truth of the self, showing where one had strayed from harmony and offering the chance to return. Cayce believed this union of body and spirit was the deepest cure. Science could measure detoxification and repair, but what it could not explain was the peace, the courage, and the sense of purpose that emerged when fasting was infused with prayer. Those qualities, he said, were not byproducts of biology but signs that divine law was at work. Healing was not just the removal of symptoms, but the restoration of order, and fasting provided the space for that order to return. It was a journey inward, where hunger was not a torment, but a guide, pointing the way back to balance. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce showed that fasting could reach into the most stubborn patterns of human life, addictions, destructive habits, and cycles of suffering, and begin to break them, not by force, but by surrender to something greater. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "Healing begins with alignment." These words are more than a phrase. They are a reminder that when the body, mind, and spirit move together in harmony, transformation becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Cayce often shared stories that revealed just how far-reaching the impact of fasting could be when it was lived with sincerity. One of the most powerful examples was that of a man who had battled alcoholism for years. No remedy, no advice, no force of will had been enough to break the cycle. His body was weakened, his spirit clouded, and his will seemed to have lost all strength. But when he embraced fasting, combined with daily prayer and a posture of surrender, something remarkable happened. The hunger that might have felt like torment before became an ally, a sign of cleansing taking place both in the body and in the subconscious mind. Cravings that had haunted him began to weaken, as though the fog surrounding his life was finally lifting. Cayce explained that fasting was not a magic trick, but a way of cooperating with divine law, allowing God's order to move freely through places where chaos once ruled. The transformation was not just physical detoxification, it was the loosening of invisible chains that had bound him for decades. To help people understand this process more clearly, Cayce often turned to another striking metaphor. He said fasting was like tuning a radio. The human soul, much like an old receiver, is constantly surrounded by signals, impressions, and guidance. But when clutter builds up, when the static of fear, indulgence, or distraction fills the airwaves, the true signal becomes lost in the noise. Fasting, he explained, cleared the static. It stripped away interference, allowing the soul to lock onto the frequency of God's voice. This imagery was especially powerful in his day, when radios had become the center of every home, bringing music and news across invisible waves. People understood that if the tuning was off even slightly, all you heard was noise. Cayce revealed that the same was true of the spirit. Without discipline, the soul is drowned in static, but with fasting and prayer, the signal becomes clear, and divine truth is heard. The impact of this realignment went beyond mental clarity. Fasting sharpened spiritual vision, heightening the sensitivity of the inner self. People reported dreams so vivid they felt more real than waking life, insights that arrived suddenly with undeniable certainty, and encounters with a sense of presence that could not be explained in ordinary terms. For Cayce, these were not illusions or fantasies but natural consequences of removing the clutter. When the body was quiet and the mind stilled, the spirit stepped forward with power. Hunger became not an emptiness, but a doorway, and through that doorway flowed revelations that gave strength, direction, and peace. It was as if fasting peeled back a veil that usually hides the unseen, allowing the soul to glimpse a reality that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. What made this especially transformative was the way it reframed the struggles of life. The man who broke free from addiction, the seekers who heard clarity in the static, those who dreamed with new vision, all of them discovered that fasting was less about denying the body and more about discovering the hidden truth of who they were. It showed them that beyond cravings, beyond habits, beyond fear, there was a deeper self that longed for alignment with God. And once they touched that place, everything changed. Decisions became clearer, courage returned, and life itself took on a sense of meaning that had been lost in the fog of distraction. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce revealed that fasting was not just about hearing or seeing more clearly in the moment, but about cleansing the heart itself, stripping away pride, bitterness, and judgment, so that love could flow freely once again. If this connects with your own reflections, write in the comments, "I choose clarity." By doing so, you affirm your willingness to tune out the static, to seek alignment, and to let your soul resonate with the signal of truth. Cayce never tired of reminding seekers that the essence of fasting was love. Without love, even the most disciplined effort became hollow. He warned that some approached fasting as a contest, measuring their worth in hours endured or days completed, as if God rewarded endurance alone. But this mindset missed the hidden truth. The power of fasting was never about competition or comparison. It was about compassion. The real measure was whether the act softened the heart, inspired forgiveness, and expanded one's ability to serve. If someone fasted but emerged proud, judgmental, or resentful, they had missed the spirit of the practice. Hunger that led to bitterness was simply starvation. Hunger that led to love was transformation. He explained that every fast was an invitation to cleanse not only the body, but also the heart. Let the fast, he said, be not of bread alone, but of anger, envy, and judgment. When these burdens were surrendered, the space left behind became fertile ground for divine love to take root. This was why fasting had the power to renew relationships, restore clarity, and ignite compassion in ways that surprised those who practiced it sincerely. Behind the scenes, it was less about the food left uneaten, and more about the layers of pride and fear peeled away in silence. That peeling back revealed what had always been there, the soul's natural capacity to love freely. At the heart of Cayce's teaching was the conviction that fasting mirrored the life of Christ. Jesus fasted not to punish himself, but to prepare, to strengthen, to align fully with the Father's will. In doing so, he revealed the path of surrender and service, showing that true strength comes when the body decreases, so the spirit may increase. Cayce insisted that every fast, however small, carried this same potential. It was a path of renewal, not deprivation. It liberated the soul from illusions of control, teaching it to rest in divine order. In that release, seekers found not emptiness but fullness, not weakness but strength, not isolation but communion. Fasting became, in this sense, a living sacrament. It was a way of walking in Christ's footsteps, embodying his example of humility and love. Each act of hunger transformed into a silent prayer. Not my will, but yours be done. And in that prayer, the soul rediscovered its truest freedom. Cayce framed fasting as liberation. Liberation from patterns of desire that enslaved. Liberation from attachments that clouded perception. Liberation from the illusion that the physical alone defines existence. It was a return to essence, a journey of alignment that prepared the soul not only to commune with God, but to serve others with greater compassion. What made these teachings so compelling was their balance of practicality and depth. He never demanded extremes, never encouraged self-harm, but instead pointed seekers toward the hidden power of intention. A single meal missed in prayer could become as significant as days of abstinence when lived with sincerity. The question was always one of the heart. Did the fast draw the soul closer to love, closer to Christ, closer to service? If the answer was yes, then the act had fulfilled its sacred purpose. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because Cayce revealed that fasting was part of a greater cycle, a rhythm of cleansing, revelation, surrender, and service that could reshape not only individuals, but entire communities when embraced fully. If these reflections move something in you, write in the comments, "Love is the purpose." These words affirm the deepest truth Cayce sought to share, that every act of discipline, every fast, every surrender, is ultimately meant to awaken us to love. If you've stayed with me all the way to this point, it tells me that this message resonated with you in some way. That's exactly why I'd love for you to subscribe, so you don't miss the next reflections we'll share together, the kind that keep adding value and depth to your own journey. And if this spoke to you personally, leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you walked this path alongside me. It's always inspiring to see who felt the weight of these words. If you felt a connection here, a simple like on this video is more than enough to show it, and it helps a Keep this space alive for all of us. And before you go, there's a video right here that beautifully complements everything we've been exploring. Click and continue with me over there. The journey is far from over.